So, Farron, in the last segment, we were, of course, talking about the terrorist attack that took place in Brussels, Belgium, where multiple explosions in the Belgian airport and in the Belgian metro system, their subway system, killed at least 31 people and injured over 200. That attack took place hours before what would have been the news of that day, and that was a major address that President Obama gave in Havana, the Cuban capital. The first time a president has visited Cuba in over a half a century, and it marks at least not quite the ending of the isolation of Cuba. It is we still have an embargo, statutorily imposed embargo, that we hope to see Congress roll back. But this was it was a fascinating piece of history, long overdue, and of course there are still problems with the Cuban government. But President Obama, I thought, very sort of even-handedly recognized, too, some of the things that Cuba does right. And, of course, that sound that you heard was right-wingers' heads popping all across the country.
It's very interesting. You know, I think President Obama is doing what a good diplomat should do. He is attempting to normalize these Cuban relations that, you know, for more than 50 years at this point, have been so strained, you know, as part of the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of that. And that is what Republicans are still holding on to. They're still holding on to that particular image of the Cuban threat, that they were going to send missiles over to the United States. A lot of them just cannot still, for some reason, get over that. Cuba's always been an enemy throughout their entire lives. And it crushes them to think that things can change. And, you know, as you pointed out, Cuba, obviously, still a lot of problems. But, you know, we have to keep moving forward. We have to, you know, as the United States, say, what can we do to help the situation? How can we help the Cuban people? And, you know, I think what Obama has done here is a great step forward. I've been a huge fan of his, you know, approach towards diplomacy throughout his entire, you know, tenure in office. And this Cuban trip that Republicans absolutely seem to hate for some reason makes me like it even more. Because these people hate change so much that they're not even willing to see the advancements made in this country, and that we can have normal relations. It's just Obama did it, so we hate it.
Well, I mean, you know, I think it confirms a lot of things about Obama that the right, you know, has always said. You know, Glenn Beck earlier this week said the mask has come off. Obama is a pure-on Marxist. The reality is that for 50 some odd years, more, almost 60 some odd years, there have been a strong contingency of Cubans who had their property nationalized in Cuba because you had an incredibly unequal society where you had people living in abject, horrid poverty, and the society was functioning only for, frankly, oligarchs. And there has been this hope by those Cuban exiles for decades now that the Cuban transition from one of a Marxist state, if you will, I don't know if that's quite, but a socialist authoritarian rule, to some, you know, form of democracy. They were hoping that this would be basically a total implosion. Because the idea was if it's a total implosion, they'd be able to come back and get their plantations or get their businesses, as opposed to a peaceful, slow, gradual, more equitable transition to a more democratic and free state. I mean, the fact of the matter is there are political prisoners in Cuba. The fact of the matter is that people do live there with a concern as to who's overhearing their conversations in many times. But the flip side of that, of course, is that Cubans have better housing overall. They have better health care, better education, better literacy rates. There's a whole host of quality of life issues that Cubans enjoy. But nevertheless, there was a hope that there would not be some type of slow transition. And make no mistake about it. I mean, there's going to be a transition, and there's, capitalism flows there. Europeans have been there for quite some time with hotels and businesses and whatnot. So this is going to be an orderly transition, and that's problematic for people who wanted to see the entire system collapse. Now, as a political force in this country, those people, frankly, are losing relevance. They're aging out, if you will, and the next and subsequent generations of Cubans no longer support the embargo. So, I mean, if you want meaningful change in Cuba, if you want a more free and just society, this is the route that it takes. And so it is disingenuous to say that, you are supporting the rights and freedoms of the Cuban people and support any other mechanism to achieve that than this type of engagement as manifested, like you say, by Barack Obama visiting Cuba. So, yes, this is a great step forward. And remember when Barack Obama entered office, he talked about the two main sort of foreign policy issues he talked about was creating some dialogue with the Iranians and with Cuba, and he has accomplished that. I have other critiques of President Obama, but you have to acknowledge those successes.